Again, so I want to start off this video by letting you know, no matter what you hear people say, the Jimmy Dore Show is not anti-vax. We're for the correct rollout of the vaccines, which means you vaccinate the people who are vulnerable, elderly people, people with comorbidities, people who are frontline workers, stuff like that. But you certainly don't vaccinate kids. And if you're afraid of getting the vaccine, if you're afraid of COVID, you should get it. Okay. COVID-19 researcher blows the whistle on data integrity issues in Pfizer's vaccine trial. Well, you knew this was coming, right? Because the big pharma are the biggest liars, scammers, criminals in the country. And so you knew had to do some shady stuff around these vaccines, and of course they did. A regional director who was employed, this is by the British Medical Journal, a regional director who was employed at the regional organization Ventavia Research Group has told the BMJ that the company falsified data, unblinded patients, meaning in a double-blind study, they were able to know what they were getting, employed inadequately trained vaccinators, and was slow to follow up on adverse events reported in Pfizer's pivotal phase 3 trial. Slow to follow up on adverse events. So that's another thing people don't want you to talk about. When I got injured by the jab, I told people on Twitter, and people called me a liar. People called me a grifter. People called me all that. It's just, that's not how science works. You're supposed to have people tell you their adverse reactions so you can make the vaccine safer. If you want people to shut up about their adverse reactions to the vaccine, you know what that makes you? That makes you part of a cover-up, because that's what that is. After repeatedly notifying Ventavia of these problems, the regional director, Brooke Jackson, emailed a complaint to the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, the FDA. Ventavia fired her that same day. Now, you still think Jimmy Dore is lying to you? You still think Jimmy Dore is the problem here? If you were going to make a video today about COVID, would it be about Jimmy Dore? Or would it be about this? Or would it be about Fauci? Or would it be about that we all now know everyone's going to get it? Would it be about any of that? Or would it be about me? Because you're jealous and you're riding my dick for clicks. Ventavia fired her later that same day. I wonder which YouTube lefty shows are going to cover this and which ones aren't. In autumn 2020, Pfizer's chairman and chief executive, Albert Bourla, released an open letter to the billions of people around the world who were investing their hopes in a safe and effective COVID-19 vaccine to end the pandemic. As I've said before, we are operating at the speed of science, Bourla wrote, explaining to the public when they could expect a Pfizer vaccine to be authorized in the United States. Okay, vaccines are never going to end this pandemic. That's a scientific fact that no one wants to realize. But that's what we're saying at this show, and that's what makes people call us anti-vax, and that's why they're wrong. But for researchers who were testing Pfizer's vaccine at several sites in Texas during the autumn, speed may have come at a cost of data integrity and patient safety. Staff who conducted quality control checks were overwhelmed by the volume of problems they were finding. I'll read it again. Staff who conducted quality control checks were overwhelmed. Not that they found a big number. They were overwhelmed by the volume of problems they were finding. Wow. Jackson has told the BMJ that during the 2 weeks she was employed at Ventavia in September 2020, she repeatedly informed her superiors of poor laboratory management, patient safety concerns, and data integrity issues. Jackson was a trained clinical trial auditor who previously held a director of operations position and came to Ventavia with more than 15 years' experience in clinical research, coordination, and management. Ventavia was not keeping up with the data entry queries, shows an email sent by ICON, the contract research organization with which Pfizer partnered on the trial. ICON reminded Ventavia in a September 2020 email, the expectation for the study is that all queries are addressed within 24 hours. ICON then highlighted over 100 outstanding queries older than 3 days old in yellow. Examples included 2 individuals for which subjects has reported with severe symptoms reactions. Per protocol, subjects experiencing grade 3 local reactions should be contacted. Please confirm if an unplanned contact was made and update the corresponding form as appropriate. That's one of the problems. Look at that. Documents show that problems had been going on for weeks. In a list of action items circulated among Ventavia leaders in the early August 2020, shortly after the trial began and before Jackson's hiring, a Ventavia executive identified 3 site staff members with whom to, quote, go over e-diary issue, falsifying data, etc., end quote. One of them was verbally counseled for changing data and not noting late entry. What the F? September 25th, 2020, Jackson called the FDA to warn about unsound practices in Pfizer's clinical trial at Ventavia. She then reported her concerns in an email to the agency. In the afternoon, Ventavia fired Jackson, deemed not a good fit, according to her separation letter.
Oh, wow.
Jackson told the BMJ it was the first time she had been fired in her 20-year career in research. Now, who is the bad guy in COVID? Is it Jimmy Dore or is it Pfizer? Or is it Ventavia? In her 25 September email to the FDA, Jackson wrote that Ventavia had enrolled more than 1,000 participants in 3 sites. The full trial enrolled around 44,000 participants across 153 sites that included numerous commercial companies and academic centers. She then listed a dozen concerns that she had witnessed at these sites. So, by the way, there was 153 sites, meaning where you could go get the vaccine. Do you remember? Do you know how many they inspected? Hold on to your hat. So here's what she noticed. Participants placed in a hallway after injection and not being monitored by clinical staff. Lack of timely follow-up of patients who experienced adverse events. Protocol deviations not being reported. Vaccines not being stored at proper temperatures. Mislabeled laboratory specimens and targeting of Ventavia staff for reporting these types of problems. A few days later, Jackson received a call from an FDA inspector to discuss her report, but was told that no further information could be provided. She heard nothing further in relation to her report. In August of this year, after full approval of Pfizer's vaccine, the FDA published a summary of its inspections of the company's pivotal trial. 9 of the trial's 153 sites were inspected. Only 9 sites of the 153 vaccine trial sites were even inspected. Only 9 of them. Ventavia sites were not listed among them. So the Ventavia company, none of their vaccine trial sites were even inspected, even though you have this whistleblower saying it's all messed up. We're overwhelmed by all the mess ups. Nobody inspected their sites. And no inspection of the sites where adults were recruited took place in the 8 months after December 2020 emergency authorization. 2 former Ventavia employees spoke to the BMJ anonymously for fear of reprisal and loss of job prospects in the tightly knit research community. Both confirmed broad aspects of Jackson's complaint. One said that she had worked on over 4 dozen clinical trials in her career, including many large trials, but had never experienced such a helter-skelter work environment as with Ventavia on Pfizer's trial. I don't think it was a good, clean data, the employee said of the data Ventavia generated for Pfizer trial. It's a crazy mess. Since Jackson reported problems with Ventavia to the FDA in September 2020, Pfizer has hired Ventavia as a research subcontractor on 4 other vaccine clinical trials: the COVID-19 vaccine in children and young adults, pregnant women, and a booster dose, as well as an RSV vaccine trial. So they're working on all those. Pfizer hires them, a research subcontractor, so they could have deniability when Ventavia goes and fucks it all up and rushes it all through and overlooks all the problems. Pfizer goes, well, it's them, it wasn't me. Guess what? There it is. The FDA authorizes Pfizer BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine for emergency use in children 5 through 11 years of age. Now, that's ridiculous. It's not an emergency. Why? Because as we know, children face a very, very, very low risk of serious illness from COVID. There it is. COVID in age. An unvaccinated child is less at risk of serious COVID illness than a vaccinated 70-year-old. That's in the New York frickin' A Times. Here, also in the New York Times, for children without a serious medical condition, the danger of severe COVID is so low as to be difficult to quantify. The risk of long COVID among children, a source of fear among many parents, is also very low. I have long COVID. So here's the FDA meeting where they're talking about the side effects of the jab, the vaccine to kids. Listen to this.
But we're never going to learn about how safe the vaccine is unless we start giving it. That's just the way it goes.
That's a voting member on the FDA who voted in favor of emergency authorization for children to get a vaccine that he doesn't know what the side effects are going to be. Children who have less risk of death from COVID than they do from the influenza. So let's play the longer version.
And I think what sways me here is that is a very sort of personal choice. If I had a child who was a transplant recipient, I would really want to be able to use a vaccine like this.
That's what they say, because when you're getting a transplant, your immune system is super low. So that's what they say. If you're getting a transplant, you should get. I agree. If you're a kid, you're getting a transplant, or if you have cancer, you should probably get it. But other than that.
And there are certainly kids who probably should be vaccinated. The question of how broadly to use it, though, I think is a substantial one. And I know it's not our question, but I know we're kind of punting that to ACIP. But I do think that it's a relatively close call. And as Dr. Levy just said, as Dr. Gann said, it really is going to be a question of what the prevailing conditions are. But we're never going to learn about how safe the vaccine is unless we start giving it. That's just the way it goes. That's how we found out about rare complications of other vaccines like the rotavirus vaccine. And I do think that we are.
There you go. So there you go. That's the whistleblower, and that same company is working on the child vaccines. And nobody's going to go to prison for falsifying data, for doing it wrong. And I'm sure people knew about that. Well, they did, and then they fired the person who told them. So there you go. Brings me... I hope this reminds people to be skeptical and critical of whatever you hear from the establishment about COVID and vaccines. You should be skeptical and critical, but not anti-science. We are not. I am critical and skeptical of everything I hear from the government. Okay, and again, I'll have to say it every frickin' video because people are misquoting me. We are not anti-vax. We are telling you if you are vulnerable, you're elderly, you have comorbidities, you're a frontline worker, you should get vaccinated. If you're afraid of COVID, you should get vaccinated because it will protect you from serious illness or hospitalization, but it will protect no one else. You are still going to give it to people, and you're still going to get it if you're vaccinated. And if the virus is not going away, it's going to be here forever, and you're all going to get it at some point. So stop demonizing the unvaccinated or your neighbor or a worker, and keep your eye on Fauci and the establishment and Joe Biden, who won't give you health care in the middle of a pandemic. That would have saved 200,000 lives. I want to let you know, on November 6th, we're going to be in Baltimore. November 11th, we're in Tempe, Arizona. November 12th, we're doing Los Angeles and Studio City. November 19th, Los Angeles and Studio City. And then Thanksgiving weekend in Portland, Oregon. Go to jimmydorecomedy.com for a link for all those tickets.